Viticulture, the study and practice of growing grapes. And in today's episode, I'm gonna show you how to grow them super simply. Let's go. So the first most important thing about growing grapes is trellising. Now, if you saw our last video, you'll see that we built this grape arbor here. Now, this grape arbor is specifically built for growing grapes. The spacing and kind of the overall construction is ideal for growing grapes. We have each rung consisting of some stainless steel wire, and those stainless steel wires are spaced out 1.5 feet apart. That is going to hold our main runs of grapes, because grapes are growing up on a main stem, and then you have your leaders, right? Those leaders are runs, and they're gonna grow out to make sure there's nice airflow. Airflow is super important for growing high quality grapes. So we'll talk more about that in a second. But this is a very specific use case. You can just use an existing fence, or if you have cattle panel trellising, you could make an arbor that you could walk under. That'd be super cool. Or if you even have some of that leftover wooden latticing for underneath patios and porches, that stuff works great as well. You just wanna make sure that whatever it is can hold a lot of weight and be really resistant to blowing around. Because once you get a nice full vine of grapes, the last thing you want is to have all of that come crashing down on the ground, because it's pretty hard to remedy. You also don't wanna make the mistake of planting your grapes and then wondering about trellising later. You definitely wanna get trellising done first, or picking a location with good trellising, because as soon as grapes start growing, they're a vine, and you don't want them running all over the ground, because that gets to be a pretty big mess. So we're gonna dig our hole, and we're gonna plant our grapes directly below the trellis. Now, you don't want to plant it far out and lean it in. You want to be directly underneath it so it's growing straight up. That's going to give you the best growth habit, and when you start right, you have a better chance of ending right. All right, so the holes we're digging here are going to just basically hold our pots with our pre-rooted grapevines. The soil is a little bit heavy clay, so we're probably gonna have to amend with some compost and other things to soften the soil. But the really nice thing about growing grapes is that grapes are pretty resilient. They grow in a pretty wide range of soil conditions. Now, grapes do like well-draining soil, but they can handle some clay in the soil no problem. So it's not the end of the world. But what we are gonna have to do is we are gonna have to amend the pH of the soil. This, because it has some clay, does have some alkalinity to it. And because it's got some alkalinity, we need to make sure we amend with some sulfur. Grapevines really like a pH of right around 5.5 to 6, so slightly acidic. And because of that, we're gonna use some powdered sulfur for a good part of their lifespan, because the soil conditions we have here, they're not acidic. So once you have the pH amended properly, what we're gonna do is we're gonna space out our plants properly. Now, it's a real common mistake to crowd them too close. Now, our trellis here is about 10 feet wide, and because of that, we're only gonna fit about 2 grapes here. You don't wanna crowd your plants too close together, because as they grow, they're gonna grow really fast, but also you don't want them to grow too closely to each other, because anytime you have overlapping foliage, as we'll talk about with disease, you really invite a lot of disease through a lack of airflow. So we're going to make sure that our holes are spaced out roughly about 5 feet apart. And so we're gonna get a plant in the center and a plant in the center, and it'll be perfect for 2 beautiful grape plants. So we're gonna take our sulfur, throw it in the hole. I'm gonna use about 1.5 handfuls or so, and then I'm gonna mix that up. Then we're gonna talk about fertilizer. You really need to focus on a nice all-purpose high nitrogen fertilizer. Grapevines use a ton of nitrogen. They're very heavy feeders. And so when it comes to growing grapes, nitrogen is going to be the largest reason you either succeed or fail with growing grapes, because as your plants grow, they're gonna use a ton of that nitrogen. Now, I'm not expecting our plants to fruit the first year, so any other type of nutrient that involves fruiting, like potassium or phosphorus, is kind of irrelevant this time of year. We're focusing on nitrogen first. So we put about 3.5 good handfuls of trifecta into the hole, work that up. We got our plant. Now, our plant is a beautiful rooted cutting. This is a variety known as Reliance. If it looks like some of the edges got a little bit burned, that's because at the nursery, when we purchased these, we just had a really super cold night, and it kind of got some frostbite. It'll bounce back from that, no problem. And we're gonna backfill. And what you'll notice here is that these grape plants here have basically a Y, and that Y is what you wanna look for. You wanna prune out except for one main growth leader, right? You want one main growth leader, and then when you prune that at the top, it's going to form 2 lateral growth points. That is your first run. You want to focus on runs every single year. And once you have your runs, basically you're going to prune it to size. You never want to fill up more than a 5-foot span with one grape plant, because otherwise you're going to notice there will be growth past that 5-foot mark, but the overall fruit will be really undersized. The amount of energy that it requires to send nutrients and energy to form fruit way off in the distance, it's gonna take a lot of energy. So you wanna make sure you keep the energy close to the plant, and that's how grape growers will grow their plants. That's what leads to a really stocky trunk and just a tiny bit of growth up on the trellis here. So the first year, we're gonna trellis along this rung here. At that point, we're gonna find 1 leader to then grow up, and we're gonna focus on that 1 leader, get it to grow up from one of these offshoots, and we're gonna prune it, and we're gonna create that fork, and we're gonna get it to grow out here as well. That will take some time. That will take 3, 4, maybe even 5 years to get it to fill up the entire trellis. But you wanna take time and, and use patience when growing grapes, because yes, if you don't maintain them at all, they're gonna grow totally feral. It's gonna be all over the place, and you're gonna think, hey, wow, I'm growing grapes really well. But if you wanna grow grapes like a pro, you gotta do what the pros do. And that takes years. It takes years to do a very good job and to have a nice full plant. And so like I said, get that main growth leader, prune it at the top if it hasn't been already. Take 2 main growth leaders, work on trellising them out first, then get 1, trellis it up. Once it gets up to the top, then trellis it out again, and do that until the trellis is full, and you're gonna be set. Next thing I want to talk about is disease. Now, grapes are very prone to disease. There's a lot of diseases, a lot of fungal spots, a lot of issues with growing grapes because they've been so domesticated over time that if you want a really easy grape to grow, I'd recommend growing Concord. Concord is kind of your standard grape. We actually have one back there. We just decided not to plant, but overall, it's going to be the most disease resistant of all the grape varieties, but it's kind of the most commonly known normal variety. It doesn't produce a very good table grape, whereas this Reliance is a wonderful table grape. And then we have another white grape that produces a beautiful white grape for table grapes. And if you want a very nice table grape, you're going to sacrifice on some disease resistance. And so the best way to reduce disease and reduce fungal issues is through airflow. And that's why we have them on this trellis here, is because the trellis is going to support them vertically, so they're not growing all along the ground. And also it's going to allow us to prune out all that extra growth that would be creating a mess in here that would then kind of constrict that airflow and cause there to be disease. We want the leaves to dry out very fast. We want to make sure that if we start to notice signs of disease, things like powdery mildew are really common on grapes, but there's so many others as well. Rust spot, tons of different grape diseases. You want to spray with either a baking soda solution of 2 tablespoons of baking soda to a gallon of water, mix it up in a pump sprayer, spray your plants down, or use something like a copper fungicide. Both work really well, but you want to make sure you catch it early and spray often so that the problem doesn't get out of hand. And if you're starting to notice a very common reoccurrence of it, prune for airflow. Airflow is so key with drying out the foliage and helping your plants stay healthier. All right, 1 down, 1 more to go. The next thing I want to talk about is watering. Watering could not be more important when it comes to producing really high quality grapes. Now, if you're growing for wine, grape growers will tell you don't water that much because you want to condense those sugars, right? That makes a sweeter, higher quality wine. If you're growing for table grapes though, you want a nice, crisp, crunchy, sweet grape. So there's a balance. Too much water and you're going to be left with really watery, very crunchy grapes, but not a whole lot of flavor. But not enough water and you're going to be left with very dry, kind of semi-crunchy, kind of soft grapes, which are going to be very sweet, but really poor texture. So just know that depending on how much you water is going to change the sweetness, the flavor, and the texture. I myself personally, I am more of a texture person when it comes to table grapes. I really like a nice crunchy, crisp grape. So I find myself watering more frequently. That will be up to you though. I will water these plants here because they're in clay soil. I'll water them a little bit less than I would normally if they were in a very loose, sandy, well-draining soil. I'm probably gonna water these in this condition probably about once every other week. So keep that in mind. And if it gets very dry, maybe a little more frequently than that, but that's probably about the average, once every other week. Now, since we just transplanted, I am gonna be watering more frequently, but that's only because we just transplanted. If you're growing grapes and they're already existing and you're just trying to perfect your growing conditions for them, make sure you're watering a little less frequently than you probably think. You know, a lot of your plants, they do tend to like really a lot of water. But if you water grapes too much, you can run into some issues and you might get some conditions you're not really wanting. So don't water them too much, but just keep in mind. All right, one of the final things I want to talk about are pests. Now, pests could not be more important to control because pests will absolutely ravage your grapevines. They're very prone to pests, from things like your leaf-eating bugs like Japanese beetles, or even ants, which love those sugary sweet grapes, to aphids, which feed on the grape leaves and weaken the plant. There's so many pests that you're gonna come across. But the biggest thing is, if you wanna grow them organically, use something like neem oil. I love using neem oil or an insecticidal soap. Both are an awesome option to controlling pests organically, but also using things like intercropping methods. In amongst our grapevines here, we're gonna be planting stuff like basil, marigolds, and dill. Those very fragrant herbs help to kind of mask the overall scent of the grapevines, make it a little less easy to locate. But here's the secret. Here's the secret that we're gonna apply, and this is what we use on our whole garden. It's keeping them stress-free. A lot of you don't keep your plants stress-free, whether it be not enough water or whether it be not enough nutrients, not the right type of soil. By making sure that things are dialed in as good as they can be, it's gonna make sure that the grapes are growing at their optimum level, and because of that, they're not gonna release any stress pheromones. Those stress pheromones are basically help signals that gets transmitted throughout the air, and pests will pick up on that and say, there's a weak plant that I can take advantage of. And so the less stressed your plant is, the healthier it's gonna be, and the less pests you're gonna have. But there are some options for you with pests, and grapes overall are pretty easy to grow. So I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all learned something new. As these are growing and developing, we're gonna keep you all posted and bring you all along for some updates. And I hope you guys try growing grapes. They're really fun, and I don't think they get enough love in the garden, but I hope you'll try them. As always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow bigger. Take care. Bye. Hey, thank you so much for watching today's video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, consider checking this one out. You'll probably enjoy it just as much. I want to thank you so much for your viewership, because without it, this channel would not be as amazing as it is. If you haven't subscribed yet, it's free. Consider doing that. We upload every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, rain or shine. And if you need any garden tools, supplies, or seeds, check out MIgardener.com. We got you covered. See you guys in the garden. Bye.